Lane 7 held a secret that would expose one of the most unusual espionage operations in Cold War history. A simple bowling alley worker in Detroit noticed something nobody else saw, and what he discovered would shatter the trust of an entire community. The winter of 1957 brought more than just snow to Detroit's industrial east side, where factory smokestacks painted the sky gray and the smell of burning coal mixed with the metallic tang of steel production that defined the rhythm of life for 200,000 workers who built the cars and tanks and jet engines that kept America ahead of the Soviet Union in the arms race that dominated every newspaper headline. Brandon Turner had worked at Bowling Green Lanes for 3 years, ever since his discharge from the Army, where he served as a supply clerk at Fort Benning, processing inventory reports that taught him to notice discrepancies and patterns that most people overlooked, skills that seemed useless in civilian life until the night he realized that Lane 7 operated according to rules that made no sense. The bowling alley occupied a converted warehouse on Gratiot Avenue, wedged between a General Motors defense contractor facility that manufactured experimental turbine components and a Lithuanian social club where old men complained about communists in voices loud enough to hear through the thin walls. Grigory Melnikov had owned Bowling Green Lanes since 1932, building the business from a 6-lane operation into a modest 24-lane establishment that served working-class families who saved their spare change for Friday night entertainment. Turner had heard the story from regular customers who remembered Melnikov as a skinny teenager, fresh off the boat from Leningrad, though the owner himself rarely spoke about his childhood in Russia or his parents who died in a tenement fire 6 months after arriving in America. The owner treated employees well, paid slightly above minimum wage, and had a reputation for hiring veterans and men down on their luck, which explained why Turner got the job despite having no experience in the bowling industry. The night shift suited Turner because it meant fewer customers and more time for maintenance tasks. He worked from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, cleaning lanes with mineral oil, organizing returned bowling balls by weight, sanitizing rental shoes with antifungal spray, and helping the occasional drunk who stumbled in demanding to bowl despite barely being able to stand upright. The work required no complicated decisions, and Turner appreciated the simplicity after years of military bureaucracy. Thursday nights broke the pattern that Turner had unconsciously memorized over 3 years of night shifts. Fyodor Markov arrived every Thursday at exactly 11:30, always alone, always wearing the same dark grey suit that looked expensive but outdated. The man requested Lane 7 with rehearsed politeness, paid for 2 hours even though he rarely bowled more than 3 games, and demonstrated a complete lack of skill that seemed almost deliberate, throwing gutter balls with a frequency that suggested he had never bowled before despite showing up every single week without fail. Turner had tried making conversation during the first few visits, but Markov responded with vague pleasantries and obvious discomfort that made clear he preferred to be left alone. The custom bowling balls appeared in Melnikov's office in late October, stored in a locked cabinet that the owner opened only when Markov arrived. 3 balls that looked identical to house balls, except for small engraved numbers on the thumb holes. Turner noticed because noticing details was what he did during long empty hours, and the locked cabinet represented an anomaly in a business where everything else sat exposed on open shelves. Melnikov handled the custom balls with unusual care, wiping them down before placing them in the ball return for Lane 7, and always collected them personally at the end of Markov's session. Lane 7 occupied an unfortunate position beneath a ventilation shaft connecting to the GM facility next door. The lane collected more dust and showed more wear than lanes 6 or 8 despite receiving less overall use. Turner mentioned this to Melnikov during a slow Tuesday night in early November. The response came too quickly with too much detail about wood grain patterns and humidity fluctuations, an explanation that felt rehearsed the same way Markov's polite requests felt rehearsed. The pattern crystallized on a Thursday in mid-November when Turner arrived to find Melnikov in his office with the custom balls already removed from the cabinet, arranged on his desk alongside tools that looked more appropriate for a jewelry maker than a bowling alley owner. Small precision screwdrivers, a jeweler's loop, what appeared to be a miniature drill press. Melnikov looked up with genuine surprise, quickly gathered the tools and returned them to a drawer that he locked with a small key. He offered no explanation simply stated he was performing routine maintenance on premium equipment, and dismissed Turner with instructions to focus on cleaning the restrooms. Markov arrived late that Thursday, at midnight instead of 11:30, and seemed agitated in a way Turner had never observed. The man requested lane 7, as always, but kept checking his wristwatch every few minutes and glancing toward the entrance as though expecting someone else. His bowling became even more erratic, with balls rolling so far off course they ended up in adjacent lanes. The custom balls appeared on the ball return, and Markov used each one in sequence, 1 through 3, his fingers exploring each thumbhole for several seconds longer than necessary before gripping and releasing. Something happened at 1:45 that changed everything. Markov finished his final game and walked toward the counter, but before reaching it he stopped abruptly, turned back toward lane 7 and picked up ball number 2 with movements that suggested sudden decision rather than planned action. He walked directly to Melnikov's office without knocking, disappeared inside for less than 30 seconds, emerged without the bowling ball. Turner heard the locked cabinet opening and closing, brief conversation in voices too low to distinguish words. Then Markov left the building without completing the usual payment ritual. Melnikov appeared moments later, handled the payment himself, told Turner to leave lane 7 exactly as it was, not to clean or organize anything, and to forget that Markov had visited early. The instruction to forget struck Turner as the kind of order that guaranteed he would remember everything in precise detail. He finished his shift wondering why custom bowling balls required jeweler's tools, why Markov explored thumbholes before throwing, why the owner would break his pattern to specifically instruct an employee to forget what he had witnessed. 3 years of processing army supply requisitions had taught Brandon Turner that unusual deviations from established patterns usually indicated something worth investigating further. Turner spent the following week observing lane 7 with the systematic attention he had once applied to military supply discrepancies, the kind of focused scrutiny that had helped him identify a theft ring at Fort Benning, where sergeants were selling ammunition to civilian gun dealers by manipulating inventory records that nobody else bothered to cross-reference against actual physical counts in the storage bunkers. He arrived early for his Thursday shift, at 10:30 instead of 11, parking his Ford across the street where he could watch the front entrance of Bowling Green lanes while pretending to read the Detroit Free Press sports section that reported the Lions' continuing struggles and speculation about whether the team would ever recover from their championship season 3 years earlier. Melnikov arrived at 10:45, carrying a leather briefcase that Turner had never seen before, the kind of case a lawyer might carry to court or a businessman might use for important documents, and the owner glanced around the parking lot with unusual caution before unlocking the front door and disappearing inside the darkened building. Turner waited 15 minutes before entering through the employee door in the rear alley, moving quietly through the equipment room where spare pins and bowling shoes filled metal shelving units that reached nearly to the ceiling and created narrow passages that amplified every sound in the empty building. The office door stood half open, and light spilled into the hallway from Melnikov's desk lamp, the same focused beam that had illuminated the jewelry tools 2 weeks earlier, and Turner positioned himself behind a shelving unit where he could observe without being seen. The owner sat hunched over his desk with the 3 custom bowling balls arranged in front of him and the leather briefcase open beside them, and he worked with intense concentration that made him oblivious to everything except the task that consumed his attention. Turner watched Melnikov insert a small screwdriver into the thumbhole of ball number 1, twist carefully, and then extract what appeared to be a cylindrical plug that fit so perfectly inside the hole that it would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. The plug opened like a miniature container, revealing a hollow interior where Melnikov placed a tightly rolled paper no thicker than a cigarette, and Turner realized he was watching information being loaded into a delivery system that had probably operated undetected for months or possibly years, right under his nose while he cleaned floors and organized balls and sanitized shoes without ever questioning why a businessman would show up every Thursday night to bowl poorly on a specific lane using custom equipment that required precision tools to maintain. Melnikov repeated the process with balls 2 and 3, loading each with rolled papers extracted from a manila envelope in his briefcase, and then he carefully resealed each plug and tested the thumbholes to ensure they functioned normally. before wiping down all 3 balls with a chamois cloth and returning them to the locked cabinet. The entire procedure took less than 10 minutes and demonstrated a level of practiced efficiency that came only from extensive repetition. Turner retreated to the equipment room and made enough noise organizing rental shoes that Melnikov would hear him and assume he had just arrived for his shift. The owner emerged from his office carrying the empty briefcase and wearing the pleasant expression he maintained for employees and customers, greeting Turner with casual conversation about weather forecasts, predicting heavy snow, and questions about whether Turner had remembered to salt the front walkway before the evening rush. They discussed mundane operational details for 5 minutes, while Turner pretended not to notice that Melnikov kept glancing at his wristwatch with the same nervous anticipation that Markov had displayed the previous Thursday. The owner left at 11:15, claiming he had dinner plans with friends from the Lithuanian club, an explanation that felt false because Melnikov rarely left the bowling alley during business hours and had never mentioned social obligations that conflicted with his usual routine. Markov arrived at exactly 11:30, carrying a small gym bag that seemed inconsistent with his businessman appearance and Thursday night bowling ritual. He requested lane 7 and paid for his usual 2 hours, but tonight he also rented shoes instead of wearing the custom bowling shoes he normally brought in his gym bag, a deviation from pattern that Turner noted while processing the transaction. The man seemed more relaxed than during his previous agitated visit, almost cheerful in the way he thanked Turner and asked about the weather forecast, and this shift in demeanor felt more suspicious than the previous anxiety because it suggested Markov had resolved whatever problem had troubled him 2 weeks earlier. The custom balls appeared on the return for lane 7, and Markov began his usual sequence, using balls 1 through 3 in order, and then repeating the pattern. Turner watched from behind the counter, while pretending to fill out inventory forms, studying the way Markov's fingers explored each thumb hole before gripping the ball. The man's technique looked less random tonight, more purposeful, as though he was confirming the presence of something specific inside each hole before throwing. His bowling remained deliberately poor with most balls ending in the gutter, but his attention focused entirely on the thumb holes rather than the pins or his aim or any element of actual bowling technique. At midnight, Markov finished his 3rd game and walked to the restroom carrying his gym bag. He emerged 5 minutes later without the bag and immediately approached Turner at the counter. The conversation felt scripted. Markov complained about a stuck locker in the changing area, asked if Turner could help, showed genuine impatience when Turner explained he needed to finish counting the cash drawer before leaving the counter unattended. The man's agitation grew until Turner finally agreed to check the locker, leaving his position and following Markov toward the changing area at the far end of the building. The stuck locker opened easily with minimal effort, revealing Markov's gym bag and nothing else requiring assistance. Turner turned to tell Markov the problem was solved and found himself alone in the changing area. He walked back toward the counter and saw Markov at lane 7, now holding all 3 custom balls arranged on the ball return. The man worked quickly with movements that suggested practiced routine, inserting fingers into thumb holes, extracting something, transferring items to his jacket pockets, returning balls to the exact positions where he found them. Turner stopped walking, made no sound, watched Markov complete his task, and returned to bowling as though nothing unusual had occurred. The entire sequence lasted maybe 90 seconds, quick enough that someone not specifically watching would miss it entirely. Deliberate enough to prove this was established procedure rather than improvisation. Markov bowled 2 more games using the custom balls that now presumably contained nothing in their thumb holes except empty space where rolled papers had been 15 minutes earlier. He finished at 1:30, returned his rental shoes, thanked Turner for the pleasant evening, and departed with the gym bag that probably now contained intelligence about Detroit's defense industry leadership, extracted from bowling balls that doubled as dead drops in the most unlikely espionage operation Turner could imagine. The whole system demonstrated elegant simplicity. Owner loads information, customer retrieves information. Both men maintain plausible cover as businessman and bowling alley proprietor, engaged in normal recreational activity. No suspicious meetings, no obvious exchanges. Just Thursday night bowling on lane 7. Turner waited until Markov's car disappeared down Gratiot Avenue before walking to lane 7 and examining the custom balls still sitting on the return. He picked up ball number 1 and explored the thumb hole the way he had watched Markov do countless times. His finger detected a barely perceptible seam where the plug fit inside the hole, invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. He tested balls 2 and 3 and found identical construction. Perfect hiding places for information too valuable to risk sending through mail or telephone lines that federal investigators might monitor. 3 years of processing military supply requisitions had taught Brandon Turner to document discrepancies before reporting them to superior officers who would demand evidence rather than suspicions. He retrieved a notepad from behind the counter and began writing everything he had observed. Times, actions, deviations from normal patterns, the systematic procedure that transformed innocent bowling balls into intelligence transfer devices. He wrote until his hand cramped and the night shift ended at 7 in the morning. Then he drove home wondering whether anyone would believe a bowling alley worker who claimed to have discovered Soviet espionage operating inside a converted warehouse on Detroit's East Side. The Federal Bureau of Investigation maintained a field office in the Federal Building downtown, an imposing limestone structure on West Lafayette Boulevard, where agents processed everything from bank robberies to communist infiltration cases that had multiplied dramatically since Senator McCarthy began his investigations 5 years earlier, creating an atmosphere where reporting suspicious activity about Russian immigrants became both patriotic duty and potential paranoia, depending on whether accusations proved accurate or destroyed innocent lives based on ethnic prejudice and Cold War hysteria. Turner sat in his apartment for 2 days after documenting his observations, reading his notes while trying to decide whether he had discovered actual espionage or simply misinterpreted innocent behavior through the lens of someone trained to see patterns everywhere. The decision became easier Sunday morning when he drove past Bowling Green lanes and saw Melnikov's car parked behind the building at 8 in the morning, hours before opening, and through the rear window, Turner glimpsed the owner hunched over his desk with the custom bowling balls and leather briefcase arranged in their familiar configuration. Monday morning found Turner waiting in the Federal Building lobby until offices opened at 9, clutching his notepad and rehearsing explanations that sounded increasingly absurd the more he practiced them. The receptionist directed him to Agent Eric Phillips, a 34-year-old investigator who specialized in counterintelligence cases and listened to Turner's story with an expression that shifted from polite skepticism to focused attention when Turner described the precision tools, the hollow plugs in thumbholes, and the systematic Thursday night procedure that never varied. Phillips asked detailed questions about Melnikov's background, Markov's appearance, the proximity to the General Motors defense facility, and whether Turner had documentation supporting his observations rather than just verbal accusations that could ruin reputations without producing evidence. Turner handed over his notepad, containing 3 days of detailed observations, written in the same systematic format he had used for Army inventory reports, complete with timestamps, physical descriptions, and sketches showing Lane 7's layout relative to the ventilation shaft connecting to the adjacent defense contractor facility. Phillips read through the notes with increasing interest, occasionally asking Turner to clarify specific details. The agent made no commitments about whether the Bureau would investigate, explaining that federal resources were limited and every report required evaluation, but he assured Turner someone would review the information and contact him within 48 hours if they needed additional details. The call came 36 hours later, on Tuesday evening while Turner was eating dinner. Phillips wanted to meet immediately at a diner 3 blocks away, neutral territory, where they could discuss the case without risk of being observed by anyone connected to Bowling Green lanes. Turner arrived to find Phillips accompanied by Agent Adam Campbell, a surveillance specialist who asked technical questions about sightlines inside the bowling alley, locations of windows and doors, whether the building had a basement that might provide observation positions, and how many employees worked the night shift, who might notice federal agents installing monitoring equipment. Phillips explained the Bureau's preliminary findings based on Turner's information and their own records checks. Fyodor Markov existed in federal databases as a naturalized American citizen, who immigrated from the Soviet Union in 1946, ostensibly fleeing communist oppression, and now worked as a regional sales manager for an industrial supply company servicing manufacturing facilities throughout the Midwest, including the General Motors defense contractor adjacent to Bowling Green Lanes. His employment gave him legitimate reasons to visit industrial sites and ask technical questions about production capabilities, perfect cover for gathering intelligence about American defense manufacturing. Grigory Melnikov's background showed no red flags beyond his Russian birth and teenage immigration, but the Bureau had begun investigating his associations and financial records to determine whether his modest bowling alley generated enough legitimate income to explain his comfortable lifestyle and the recent purchase of a new Cadillac. The surveillance plan required Turner's cooperation because federal agents could not raid the bowling alley without concrete evidence that would hold up in court. Campbell explained they needed Turner to continue working normal shifts, behaving exactly as he always had, while giving agents access to install hidden cameras and microphones that would document the Thursday night exchanges and provide evidence necessary for arrests. Turner agreed to help, despite the risk that Melnikov or Markov might discover the surveillance equipment and realize someone had reported their operation to federal authorities. Wednesday night brought the installation team, 4 agents who entered through the rear door at 2 in the morning, while Turner worked his normal shift and kept watch for unexpected visitors. The agents moved with practiced efficiency, drilling tiny holes in ceiling tiles above lane 7, threading microphone wires through ventilation ducts, and positioning a miniature camera inside a decorative light fixture that provided perfect view of the ball return and the floor where Markov performed his weekly retrieval. Campbell supervised, while explaining the equipment would transmit to a monitoring station in a van parked 3 blocks away. The installation took 3 hours and left no visible evidence Turner could detect even when he knew exactly where to look. The agents departed at 5 in the morning after testing all equipment and confirming both video and audio quality met evidentiary standards. Thursday arrived with weather forecasts predicting the season's first major snowstorm, heavy accumulation expected around midnight. Melnikov appeared at his usual time, carrying the leather briefcase, and wearing an expression that seemed more tense than previous Thursdays, as though he sensed something had changed. Turner greeted him normally, discussed the weather forecast, and gave no indication that federal agents were monitoring every word through microphones hidden in ceiling tiles above their heads. The owner loaded the custom bowling balls in his office, while Turner pretended to organize rental shoes, the same procedure witnessed 2 weeks earlier, but now being recorded on equipment that would document every detail for federal prosecutors. Melnikov emerged looking satisfied, locked the cabinet and departed at 11:15, claiming he wanted to get home before the storm made driving dangerous. Markov arrived at 11:25, 10 minutes earlier than usual, carrying his gym bag and moving with obvious urgency. He requested lane 7, rented shoes, and began bowling with the custom balls that now contained whatever intelligence Melnikov had loaded 6 hours earlier. Turner processed the transaction while knowing everything was being recorded, every movement, every word, every moment of the procedure that would either prove espionage or reveal innocent activity misinterpreted by an overly suspicious worker. At midnight, Markov executed his retrieval with familiar efficiency. Fake locker emergency, Turner distracted. Quick extraction from thumb holes, items transferred to pockets, returned to bowling as though nothing had happened. The entire sequence captured on federal surveillance equipment. Turner returned to the counter after checking the non-existent stuck locker and watched Markov finish his games. The man seemed pleased, almost cheerful as he thanked Turner and wished him luck with the coming storm. He departed at 1:15, carrying the gym bag that presumably contained intelligence worth risking execution to obtain. His car disappeared into the first heavy snowflakes falling on Gratiot Avenue. Agent Phillips called at 2 in the morning. The surveillance had captured everything. Video showing Melnikov loading materials, audio recording conversations, clear footage of Markov's retrieval procedure. The Bureau was moving forward with the investigation. They needed Turner to continue acting normal. One more Thursday to gather additional evidence, then arrests would follow. Turner agreed and finished his shift, wondering whether he had just witnessed the beginning of the end for a Soviet espionage network operating inside a bowling alley on Detroit's east side. The second Thursday of federal surveillance arrived with clear skies and temperatures cold enough that Turner's breath formed clouds in the parking lot when he arrived for his shift at 10:30, earlier than usual because Agent Phillips had called that afternoon, requesting a final briefing before what the Bureau expected would be the conclusive evidence-gathering operation that would justify arrests and formal espionage charges against both Melnikov and Markov. Turner met Phillips and Campbell in the monitoring van, parked 3 blocks from Bowling Green Lanes. A vehicle disguised as a commercial laundry service truck, complete with painted logos that would allow agents to relocate quickly if anyone showed unusual interest. The van's interior contained recording equipment, multiple video monitors showing feeds from cameras installed above Lane 7, and 2 additional agents who would document everything, while Phillips maintained radio contact with arrest teams positioned at locations where they could reach the bowling alley within minutes. Phillips explained the Bureau's expanded investigation that had occupied the past week. Investigators had identified the source inside the General Motors defense facility, an electrical engineer named Eric Roberts, who had access to classified jet engine designs and manufacturing specifications that would give Soviet aviation programs years of advancement if successfully transmitted to handlers in Moscow. Roberts had worked at the facility for 6 years, maintained security clearances for restricted areas, and showed financial irregularities, including a recent purchase of a lakefront cottage in northern Michigan, inconsistent with his income level. The Bureau believed Roberts passed information to Melnikov through meetings at the Lithuanian social club next door, where several GM employees bowled and would provide natural cover for document exchanges. The investigation had also revealed Melnikov's network beyond the simple dead drop Turner had discovered. Financial records showed the owner maintained regular contact with at least 6 other Russian immigrants in Detroit's industrial corridor, men who arrived in America during post-war immigration, while some actually worked as sleeper agents, gathering information about American military capabilities. Bank records indicated Melnikov received periodic cash deposits exceeding his bowling alley's reported income, money that likely represented payments from Soviet handlers. The custom bowling balls represented just one element of a larger operation that had probably compromised multiple defense contractors and provided Moscow with detailed knowledge of American jet engine technology, radar systems, and advanced metallurgy techniques. Turner listened to Phillips describe the scope and felt the weight of what he had accidentally uncovered by paying attention to inconsistent patterns. The agent emphasized the importance of tonight's surveillance, explaining they needed to document at least one more complete cycle before making arrests that would dismantle the network and potentially prevent transfer of information that could cost American lives if Soviet forces gained technological advantages. Turner agreed to maintain his normal routine while cameras recorded everything and arrest teams waited for the signal. The shift began normally with Turner unlocking the front door at 11 and turning on overhead lights, illuminating 24 lanes. Melnikov arrived 15 minutes later, carrying the familiar leather briefcase and wearing an expression that seemed relaxed, as though this Thursday represented routine procedure rather than the night federal agents would capture evidence that would likely result in death sentences for espionage. The owner greeted Turner pleasantly, commented on the cold weather, and disappeared into his office, where cameras documented him loading the custom bowling balls with rolled papers. The procedure took 8 minutes and concluded with Melnikov wiping down all 3 balls before locking them in the cabinet. He departed at 11:20, earlier than usual, mentioning visiting friends before returning home. Turner watched him leave and wondered whether this would be the last time he saw the owner as a free man. The thought created unexpected sadness, despite knowing Melnikov had betrayed the country that gave him refuge, that his friendly demeanor and community involvement were simply cover for activities that strengthened America's enemies. Markov arrived at 11:35 carrying his gym bag and moving with casual confidence. He requested Lane 7, rented shoes, and began bowling with the custom balls while Turner processed the transaction and tried to behave exactly as he had during previous Thursday nights. The man's technique showed the same deliberate incompetence, balls rolling into gutters while his attention focused on thumb holes. His fingers explored each hole before gripping, confirming the presence of information loaded 6 hours earlier. The fake locker emergency came precisely on schedule. Markov approached looking concerned, explained about a stuck mechanism, asked for Turner's help. The routine felt theatrical in its predictability, a script both men had unconsciously memorized. Turner followed Markov to the changing area, knowing agents were watching Markov move toward lane 7 to execute the retrieval. Turner opened the unstuck locker and turned to find Markov gone. He walked back slowly, giving the man time to complete the procedure, and saw him at lane 7 with all 3 custom balls arranged on the return. Quick movements, fingers in thumb holes, items extracted and transferred to jacket pockets, balls returned to exact positions, 60 seconds captured on federal surveillance equipment. Markov finished his remaining games and departed at 1:20, thanking Turner and wishing him a good night. His car disappeared down Gratiot Avenue, carrying intelligence that would never reach Soviet handlers. Phillips called at 1:30. The arrest teams were executing warrants. Melnikov at his home, Markov at his apartment, Roberts at the lakefront cottage. Simultaneous raids designed to prevent communication between conspirators who might destroy evidence or flee. The Bureau appreciated Turner's cooperation and would need him to provide formal testimony when the case went to trial. The arrests made front-page news in the Detroit Free Press 3 days later, when the Bureau released information about the espionage network that had operated undetected for years inside a bowling alley on Gratiot Avenue. The article described Turner as a vigilant employee who noticed suspicious patterns, though it omitted his name at the Bureau's request to protect him from potential retaliation. Melnikov, Markov, and Roberts all faced espionage charges carrying potential death sentences. The investigation had recovered classified documents about jet engine designs, radar specifications, and metallurgy techniques that would have advanced Soviet aviation programs by years. The trial occurred 8 months later in federal court, where prosecutors presented surveillance footage showing the complete dead-drop procedure, financial records documenting payments from Soviet handlers, and testimony from Turner describing his observations. Defense attorneys argued their clients were innocent immigrants being persecuted for their Russian heritage during national paranoia about communist infiltration, but the evidence proved overwhelming, and all 3 men received convictions on multiple counts. Melnikov and Markov received life sentences rather than execution due to cooperation that helped identify other potential Soviet operatives. Roberts received 30 years and served 23 before parole in 1985. Bowling Green lanes closed permanently 2 weeks after the arrests, when customers stopped visiting the establishment associated with Soviet espionage, and Melnikov's assets were seized by federal authorities. The building sat empty for 3 years before being demolished to make room for a parking lot, serving the expanded General Motors facility. Brandon Turner received a commendation from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and a small monetary reward for his cooperation in exposing the espionage network. But he declined interviews with newspapers and television reporters who wanted to feature the bowling alley worker, who had uncovered Soviet spies through careful observation. He found new employment at an automotive parts warehouse, where his attention to detail earned him promotion to assistant manager within 2 years. He never bowled again, unable to look at bowling balls without remembering the hollow plugs and rolled papers that had transformed innocent recreation equipment into instruments of espionage. He lived quietly in Detroit until his death in 2003 at age 74, taking satisfaction in knowing that paying attention to small details had prevented classified American defense technology from reaching Soviet engineers who would have used it to build weapons aimed at the country Turner had served in war and protected in peace.